Good morning, beautiful people. It's very good to see you this morning. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Christians have always had disagreements. In the first century, it was over food and festivals. Should the Christian community eat with Gentiles? Should they observe the rites and rituals of Judaism? These seemingly inconsequential issues nearly destroyed the church. And today, are we divided? Boy, are we. We are divided on so many things: abortion, biblical inerrancy, creation, dinosaurs. And these are just the A, B, C's, and D's. We are so divided. We have different denominations. We have fundamentalist churches, mainstream churches, conservative churches. We are so divided. We face splits in our congregations over politics, over personalities, over what color the carpet is. But even worse than that, we face division on a much wider scale. We face division in a country where most of us consider ourselves Christian. We face division on our worldviews, on the biggest issues facing our country. We face division about the core of who we are. We cannot agree on things that seem indisputable: climate change, immigration, race, class. We cannot even agree on how best to protect ourselves from the coronavirus. It is seemingly conservatives versus liberals. But do we serve a different God? No. Do we serve a divided God? Absolutely not. But do we disagree? Oh, yes, we do. Our passage today, Romans 14, 1 through 12, seems to answer a question that goes something like this: when we all serve the same God through Christ and yet vehemently disagree, what should we do? Paul's answer is, who are you to judge someone else's servants? They stand or fall before their own Lord, and they will stand because the Lord has the power to make them stand. Then later he says, but why do you judge your brother or sister? Or why do you look down on your brother or sister? We will all stand in front of the judgment seat of God. Each of us will give an account of ourselves. Do you get it? Paul's answer to the division among us is don't judge. Whoa, 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 whoa. Don't judge? But what's the primary way that we deal with conflict? We judge that those people are wrong and we are right. And then we take it one step further and judge that they're a bad person. And then we judge some more. I'm as guilty as the next person. I literally spent 30 minutes yesterday trying to decide whether or not to unfriend someone on Facebook. Someone who is a Christian, someone I love, who has made me laugh and stood by me as a friend, all because he disagrees with me on a political issue. Don't judge. That just seems impossible. At its core, I think Paul knew that the Christians of the first century needed each other. And I think we need each other now. We don't need to agree with each other, but if this nation is going to change, if we are going to make progress, if we're going to make it through this pandemic and this economic downturn, we need each other. Now, this sermon series is called The Binaries That Bind, and was conceived based on Adrienne Maree Brown's question in Emergent Strategy. She asks, which binaries bind you. We are literally bound up in the binary of conservative versus liberal. Literally judging that the other side is bad and we are better. And we're filled with resentment towards the other side. Do you remember the definition of resentment from Anne Lamott? Resentment is eating rat poison and hoping that the other person will die. Resentment of other people because of their political leanings is the same thing, except most of the people on the other side are strangers. And rather than being able to work through a process of forgiveness and reconciliation, you don't know them and you can't work through it. So what happens? Well, we're all wrapped so tight in resentment. It's like we're driving past strangers' houses and flipping them the bird, if only in our hearts. This is the problem with judgment. And for many of us, it is particularly true when it comes to Republicans and evangelicals and people who voted for Trump. If you consider it an individual situation, imagine what that anger and resentment is doing to your insides. If you consider it a collective problem, think about what it's fueling between us. What is the energy that we're putting out there? I don't know about you, but I am at best neutral and at worst a seething ball of resentment, seeing each "Don't Tread on Me" bumper sticker as a personal affront. Don't we have enough to worry about without feeling like half of the nation is worse than us? Don't we have enough to do, enough to worry about without villainizing strangers? The Bible tells us that we are all infused with the Spirit of God. Shouldn't we act like it? Shouldn't we seek that same Spirit of God in others, no matter what our disagreements? Now, you're wondering how to quit judging others. It is serious work. First, you have to tend your own heart. Remind yourself that you are enough, that you are not lacking, that you yourself are worthy of love. Know your foibles and your pain and practice self-acceptance. If you can accept your you-ness, you expand your ability to accept others. Next, you have to remind yourself that others are good too. In fact, your neighbors are good and kind and would likely help another neighbor if given the opportunity. When you traverse into judgment, call yourself back. A simple, "I bet he's a good dad," or "she's probably great at making casseroles for members of her church when they're sick." That often does the trick. You personalize strangers in the best way possible, even when they might be giving you the stink eye. Finally, articulate your kindness. What does that look like? Smile. Or smize if you have on a mask. Smile with your eyes. Pay a kindness forward, a compliment. Buy someone a cup of coffee in a long line. Allow someone with fewer groceries to go first. Take time to say hello. Train your brain that the person next to you, no matter their political leanings, is no different than you. A mix of good and bad. I want to try to say this another way too. When it comes to church conflict, which is what Paul is talking about here, systems thinking is one of the main tools to get a congregation out of conflict. In a congregational system, members play different roles, responding to each other in certain ways according to those roles. Within the system, certain patterns of behavior develop and persist. The action of one church member influences the actions of all the others. This interdependence leads either to balance or to dysfunction. Let me put it this way. If there's a bully in the system, there will always be a bully in the system. Even if that particular bully leaves, another bully will take their place. It isn't until the system begins not tolerating bullying behavior that the bully leaves the system. The number one rule when there's church conflict is that the leadership must remember who they are and stay connected with one another, even when that connection is difficult. In our Bible text today, Paul points to the systemic nature of conflict. In Romans 14:3, he says, "Those who eat must not look down on those who don't, and the ones who don't eat must not judge the ones who do." And then he says, "Those who eat for the Lord because they thank God, and those who don't eat for the Lord, and they thank the Lord too." This is systems thinking. Paul is not focusing on individuals, he's focusing on groups. And he's not recommending that folks do anything but not judge one another. Then Paul reminds them that they will be judged by God. This, in my humble systems thinking, means that Paul believes that the church members have a responsibility to act ethically, following a set of guidelines. For instance, love God and love one another as yourself. If we move this systems thinking to the United States, can we stop seeing individuals, stop personalizing the conflict, and begin to see how each of us working together is important? Can we faithfully and ethically, using Jesus' greatest commandment as our guide, act? Can we believe in each other? So I believe that's why we're seeing the rise of moral movements. And those moral movements are fueled by the idea that we are all suffering, no matter which side of the political spectrum we find ourselves. In this week's Atlantic, George Packer wrote an article called "America's Plastic Hour is Upon Us." And he said this: "Americans have lost faith in institutions, in one another, in democracy itself. Everything conspires against our role as citizens. Big money, indifferent officials, Byzantine election rules, mutual hatred, mutual ignorance, the Constitution itself. There is no remedy except the exercise of muscles that have atrophied." He says, not just by voting, but by imagining the kind of country we can live in together. You see, we imagine that country by tending to our own hearts, seeing that our neighbors are good, and refusing judgment and offering kindness. I think you can do it. Amen? Amen.